Hello, everyone, and welcome to Specialty Crop Corner. Today, we're going to be talking again with Brad Bergefurd. He's a specialist at the OSU South Centers. Brad, how is you and your family and everybody doing today while we're still under quarantine, I guess, with things going on?
Yeah, things are haven't really impacted us and my family and my clients I work with too much. Farming never stops. Mother Nature does not know that there's a pandemic occurring, so we're working hard here on the farm, getting a lot of crops in the ground. And my son is in construction and he's working, and my wife works in the pharmaceutical industry, and they haven't shut down. And the farm's been busy, so we've been going full gun. Don't even know there is a pandemic, except for I'm working from home. That's helped out a lot to sneak in and get some field work done every once in a while. But we're doing good. The farmers are all doing good. Strawberry harvest is right around the corner. We had some freeze injury last week to our specialty crops when we dipped down into the low 20s, but there's still going to be plenty of crop out there. And markets are real high right now. The farmers markets are going very well, and our local Bainbridge produce auction is going on its third week of sales, and sales are real high and products in high demand, and so things are pretty good in the specialty crops industry.
That's good. That's real good. Can't beat that. What are we going to talk about today, Brad? You were talking about Plasti-Culture and stuff.
Yeah, for those that's watched or seen last week's program where I introduced hemp, which is a new crop for Ohio, I mentioned a lot and showed a lot of pictures on how to grow CBD hemp. We use Plasti-Culture. So today I'm just going to go into what is Plasti-Culture. Plasti-Culture is not just for hemp. It is actually used quite commonly on lots of our specialty crops, peppers, tomatoes, strawberries, pumpkins, cantaloupe. Just about every fruit and vegetable crop we can grow some form of Plasti-Culture on. And research we've done at the South Centers at Piketon over the last 20 years, and some of my colleagues from around the world have done, Plasti-Culture actually increases crop yields, crop quality, helps with weed control. So there's a lot of benefits to it. So I thought I'd share that with everybody this year, not only just for farmers, but even in the garden situation. Plasti-Culture can be used if you're having weed issues or don't like to hoe. Plasti-Culture may be just the trick for you.
Well, that sounds like the thing. I definitely like the idea of having it in the garden. So,
Yeah.
got a slideshow. Let's go ahead and start with it.
All righty. Those of you that watched last week's program seen some of the field shots of our hemp growers in Kentucky. That's in Ohio. It's a new crop, so we haven't had no large fields of production yet in Ohio. But in Kentucky, I showed a few drone shots that we took last year of the hemp fields in Kentucky, and it stands out like a sore thumb when you see Plasti-Culture. Actually, if you do drive around the Bainbridge area right now, there is plastic everywhere being laid and has been laid in the fields because the weather has actually been pretty good. So folks are getting this plastic laid. Probably the biggest thing I like to tell folks is this is a mulching type material. So if you've used mulch in the garden before, like newspaper mulch or pine bark mulch or straw mulch, basically you're going to get the same thing with Plasti-Culture mulch. Plasti-Culture is a form of mulching material, but it has a few other tricks to it that we'll go over. So these are just some typical shots of our actual hemp fields we had down at South Centers and down in Southern Ohio last year. And you see there we used a white plastic. Probably not the best of choice for last year, but it was what we were able to get from the CBD company that we partnered with. But on a typical year, we would use white mulch on hemp because hemp is usually planted right around June the 1st, and then we harvest it around Labor Day. And to reduce the heat stress, we use
Now, Brad, I'm going to interrupt just a second.
Yeah.
You said white plastic, so I actually don't see a slide yet.
Okay.
What intrigues me is, the interesting part, I guess, is the white plastic versus the black. Is that just because of heat purposes?
Yeah. So you're not seeing any slides?
No slides yet.
Okay. Yeah, here's a shot of white plastic being used on hemp. Hemp is grown in the heat of the summer, so we want to try to cool the soil. So just like your car, if you have a light colored car and the sun beats on that light colored car, it's not going to be near as warm and hot as if you had a dark colored car. The dark colored plastics, which you'll see some pictures here in a little bit of the Plasticulture we use on strawberries. On strawberries, we want to heat the soil. On tomatoes, we want to heat the soil. We want to kick that crop up just a few more growing degree days to get an earlier harvest. Whereas on hemp, we want to cool the soil because the high heat generated by the black plastic could actually increase our THC levels that we discussed last week, the bad chemical in the hemp that can actually make your crop unmarketable. So this is the shot I shared last week of a field last year in Kentucky where we used the white mulch for hemp production. This is one of my farmers. These are actually strawberries. These are Plasticulture strawberries. And as you can see, the big difference between the hemp field and the Plasticulture strawberry field is we have the strawberries planted on black plastic. Plasticulture strawberries are actually planted in the fall, right around Labor Day. And we want to keep that plant growing as long as we can into the fall, into late to early November, December, because the longer we keep that plant actively growing, the more flower buds that are initiated in the plant. Now, if we used white plastic, it would cool the soil just a few degrees and slow that plant's development down, whereas the black plastic actually can increase the temperature 5 to 7 degrees, that soil temperature, compared to the ambient temperature. So that's another trick. Not only does Plasticulture help control the weeds, because you can see all we have is a little planting hole where those plants are stuck into the plastic. So that's a large area that is actually covered by the plastic and will prevent weed growth. One of the tricks I mentioned, the Bainbridge area has been laying a lot of plastic. Now, they may not be planting that plastic for a week or so, but they're laying the plastic now because even though it is a mulching material, the weed seeds will still germinate underneath that plastic. So if we can lay it in advance and let that weed seed germination grow, and then it'll die due to the lack of sunlight, when we come back in, it only takes about 10 days, 2 weeks to get that flush of growth of those weed seeds. But if we can wait that 10 days, 2 weeks, then punch our holes, we just eliminated that first flush of weeds. So we don't have to worry about any weeds coming through that little planting hole. Like I said, so there's the difference between the white, where we want to cool the soil, compared to the black, where we want to heat the soil. Other crops we use white plastic on would be our cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower. Those crops are all cool season crops. So we can actually grow them in the heat of summer and fall by tricking the plant and growing it on white plastic to cool the soil just those few degrees we need to actually produce a cool season crop under warm season growing conditions. There's a lot of things we do need to keep in mind, though, unlike non-plasticulture. To prepare that site, I already mentioned a few things where we lay that mulch well in advance, but really we need to prepare that field and prepare that garden almost a year in advance. We want to control the weed seed banks that are there to help reduce the number of weeds we have to fight. Any drainage issues, we want to correct those in the garden or in the field well in advance, because if you think about it, look at this field, half of that field is covered in plastic. So if we were to get a 4-inch or 3-inch goose drowning rain, I don't know if everybody knows what a goose drowning rain is, but the rain comes down so fast, it'll actually drown a goose. You figure if we've got half the field covered like this field in plastic, there's going to be a lot of runoff, because that's another good thing is the rain, heavy rains will be shed off of that plastic, and the crops won't be damaged from high water or heavy flooding issues. It actually will drain to the centers of the rows and away from our crops. So that's another reason we would use Plasticulture. While we're on that, a good picture right here, you can see we use Plasticulture in conjunction with raised beds, just because of that drainage issue. I have a lot of farmers that will use Plasticulture on bare ground, but if we were to get those 4-inch, 3-inch goose drowning rains, without a bed, that rainfall won't shed away from the plants. So we could still get ponding and flooding issues in the field. Whereas if we use it in combination with a raised bed, that raised bed is only 4, 6, 8 inches tall, depending on your equipment. But if we use Plasti-Culture in combination with a raised bed, it helps reduce some of the flooding and water damage issues, especially like we experienced last summer with all the constant heavy goose drowning rains we were getting. So we do want to correct those drainage issues well in advance. We want to put down our fertilizer well in advance because it's going to be hard to use granular fertilizer after we get the plastic down. It's almost impossible. If we were to add some other fertilizer, not that we can't add any more additional fertilizer if we need it throughout the growing season, but we would do that using fertigation, where we actually mix water-soluble fertilizer in the irrigation water, and then underneath the beds, under that plastic, is an irrigation tube. So we're going to talk about irrigation, drip irrigation, and fertigation next week. But I just want to let everybody know we need to get the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium down in those beds before we lay that plastic. Just like all of our crops, we need to adjust that pH well in advance. So we don't want to invest this type of management into a field that the pH is too low, and it's not going to have, the plants aren't going to respond well to growth just because of that low pH. You can control a lot of these weed seed banks through repeated cultivation or tillage the year before, or even a couple months before you lay the plastic. But once you lay that plastic, it's going to be mighty tough. Though some farmers do cultivate between the plastic, it don't give you much wiggle room, and it's easy to catch a cultivator shank on that plastic and rip it open. I do want to caution, if you're growing garden vegetables, vegetable crops, fruit crops, even the hemp or hops, watch for the non-residual herbicides that may be used on that field. We want to use those well in advance, for we don't have any residue. Some of these herbicides will actually carry over for many, many years. So we just want to make sure there is no residue left of any previous grain crop herbicides or anything like that in the garden or in the field before we lay the plastic. This plastic, just to give you some economics, just the plastic mulch alone is going to cost about $150 to $250 an acre, depending on the brand of plastic you use. And there's some that could be higher than that. There might be a few that are lower than that, but that gives you a rough idea. We're looking at about $200 an acre to use Plasti-Culture, which on the grand scheme of things, that's pretty cheap. That the benefits that we gain from Plasti-Culture on an acre of vegetables just to invest $200. We do want to add any of our organic matter, and that can be in the form of green manure crops, compost, anything well in advance of using the Plasti-Culture. And again, I warn everybody, watch for any potential herbicide carryover, and always read the labels on the herbicides that were used the previous season to see if there is a plant back restriction on planting any of our specialty crops in that field. My grandpa, he never did Plasti-Culture. He was a vegetable farmer, but he never did Plasti-Culture because it wasn't common back in the 60s and the 70s. But he's probably rolling over in his grave right now, because with Plasti-Culture, we have to work the fields finer and work that soil finer than we ever have before. So that's probably going to be the biggest difference if you've never used Plasti-Culture. We really make a nice, soft, fluffy bed because the Plasti-Culture is easier applied to a field. You don't want clods, you don't want hard soil. So we will work that field pretty fine using something like here. We have this is Tom Harker, who's our horticulture assistant. He's preparing one of our research fields using a rototiller. So we'll just hit that a couple times and make that soil really nice and fluffy. Now, we don't want to do that well in advance, because if we were to get a goose drowning rain, and as fine as this clay-based soil is, probably turn into concrete. So we want to just work that field just in advance of laying the plastic down in case we do get a rain event. We do throw up some pre-beds. I was talking how Plasti-Culture works very good in combination with using raised beds. So we do this at the research farm. This is one of my farmers throwing up pre-beds. So they've worked the field, disced it, rototilled it, then they come in with a bed shaper. And you see here how it's throwing up that pre-bed. And then we'll have the bed already made, and we come along with the plastic layer and lay the plastic right over top of it. This is Wayne Lewis, our farm manager at South Centers, and this is the outfit that we use at South Centers to lay our plastic and make our pre-beds and our raised beds. This piece of equipment will actually make the raised bed, put down the plastic mulch, as well as you can see the spool up on the top. We'll actually lay the drip irrigation tape all at the same time, all in one pass. So this is where the research crew is just laying out one of our plots. Not really anything different. What is the row spacing you use? We use it based on our tractors. You know, you don't want to make things too complicated, make it too tight. So bed spacing can be anywhere from 5 foot to 7 foot, center to center. So when you look at these beds right here, from the center of the one bed to the center of the other bed, we go on about a 6 foot row spacing. At bed spacing at Piketon in our research fields. But some farmers have narrow tires, narrow wheeled tractors, and they can go 5 foot centers. Some of my farmers that farm with horses, they can go on narrower bed spacing as well. But like our big tractor you see there, we have to go on 6 foot. You do want to see, you see Tom Harker down there on the right picture holding the drip tape. As you're going down the field laying that drip tape, you do want to hold that in place, at least to it gets buried and takes off. We bury it about 2 inches deep. If you don't bury it, as it's heating and cooling under that plastic, it starts to snake and it gets away from the plant, so it's not going to water as evenly. So here we're throwing up our pre-beds again. On some of our heavier soils, we have to go over it twice. It always pays to have a big heavy set guy on the back. That's me sitting on the back of the machine. That little, well, in my case, a lot of extra weight will make that pan a lot firmer and really firm up that bed. So if you look at that bed on this side of the tractor, it is a nice firm peaked bed. And so between the tractor, the weight of the layer, and then my weight on the back, we can throw up a nice firm bed. This is just another model, but this is the one I shared last week. This is one that the CBD hemp company provides their growers. This is the same principle, but it has a row track system, which is hydraulically driven, that helps keep your rows straight, especially when you're laying plastic on the contour of the hills that we have here in Southern Ohio. So what's a good plastic laying job look like? That is a good laying job. You see right in the center of that bed, just a little bit of a peak. We want that bed to a little bit of a peak to help out, facilitate that drainage and drain that water off of that bed, like I said. And you see it's nice and tight. Just like your sheets on your bed at home, you're always warmer when those sheets are tight against you. The bed will always be warmer when the plastic is really tight against the bed. If your bed looks like this, you've just lost a lot of money, because you can actually get a cooling effect. We're using black plastic, but because of that looseness, any heat that is translocated into that plastic down in close to the bed is escaping right through the hose, because it's like a chimney. It's not very tight against the bed, so the heat is not translocating down into the bed, and we can actually get a cooling effect. Plus, this isn't good. If we were to get that goose drowning rain, that water would pond on top of that plastic, and then those plants, these strawberry plants, would be flooded out. So this is what I'd love to see our plastic down 4 weeks before planting, just because of that weed emergence issue, and get the tucks. That's what we call right along the edge of those beds where we've thrown some soil along the edge or the tuck of the plastic. That's what holds it in place. If we can get a couple of rains on that to seal that tuck, that's going to be a lot better before we start driving equipment and tractors over top of it. So again, like this year, the weather's not cooperating very well. We just got to get it in when we get it in. But we would like to see that in a great season. We would like to see that done 4 weeks before planting. Even to reduce weed, to increase weed control even more, we can actually seed a cover crop in between that plastic. So we get done laying the plastic here, we come in with a broadcast spreader before we punch any holes, seed in between with a fescue blend, tall fescue grass, a short growing fescue, and get that seeded and growing in between. And then we have a living cover crop. So not only does that prevent the weeds from growing in there, but it reduces soil splash, which reduces the soil-borne pathogens that we can see inside that can come from the soil and get on our fruit. I see we got about 5 minutes left. How do we plant through plastic? You can do it by hand, just a trowel. But here's our plastic planter. So it has a water wheel on it. That tank has fertilizer water in it. It goes into the center of the wheel. The spikes go around at set plant spacings and punches the holes. And then people are sitting on the back and they're just shoving that plant down into that wet, muddy planting hole. Real simple, real easy, but it's also easy to plant by hand if you just have a garden or a small situation like we're doing here on one of our hemp trials. So with that, next week, we're going to talk about how we use fertigation and drip irrigation in combination with plasticulture. And this will kick it off. Does irrigation pay? All those other corn rows were irrigated. The one in the middle had a plugged hose. Look at the difference between the crops. So we'll go more in depth on that next week. But do you have any questions, Duane, about plasticulture?
Yeah, we got a couple, Brad. You said you put a irrigation tape underneath that. What is that? Is that just, does it have specific holes in it every so many feet, inches, or do you have to put them in manually?
No, correct. It goes in, you can buy different types of tapes. You can get different emitter spacings depending on the crop that you're raising. Most of them are preset. The emitters are about 12 inches apart, and we just go ahead and none of it's done by hand. It comes pre-made from the manufacturers. You tell them the output of the gallons you need per acre, and that's what we would buy and apply. So yeah, I'll show some pictures of the drip irrigation tape next week.
Okay, good. And then on the plastic itself, does when you talk about putting it down for 4 weeks, does this stay over winter, or when do you take it up, or do you throw it away? Do you try to reuse it?
We have several different types. The white one you saw was a photodegradable or a biodegradable, so it'll just turn to dust by the end of the season. You just disc it once, and it turns to dust. It's made out of a corn-based product. We also have plastics that are just straight poly, and those are hand removed and picked up, and will be. We have worked with a few recycling companies. It can be recycled if it's clean enough, but most of the time it's just landfilled if we don't have a recycler that's interested in taking it in the county.
So most generally it's a one-time use.
Yes, though we have done research at South Centers, and many of my farmers have actually gotten up to 3 years out of some plastics. If you want to double, triple crop it, you'd get a thicker millage plastic with a little heavier resin in it to help with the breakdown from the ultraviolet rays.
Gotcha. And when you said there's different thicknesses of plastic, as you said, does that if you go with thicker, even though you only do maybe per year, does that help with keeping the weed pressure down, or does it really matter?
Doesn't really matter. However, there are a couple weed species like Canada thistle and nut's edge. Nut's edge is it's a sedge weed, and it's really sharp. And Canada thistle is also sharp. So those weeds will actually come right and punch through a thinner millage plastic. So if you do have those weed species and you can't get them under control, then I would suggest to the farmer to go with a thicker millage poly under those situations. But for the most part, almost all of our other weed species are fine.
Okay, great. Well, Brad, we've reached the end of time. I'm really intrigued to hear about this irrigation next time.
Yeah, it works really good in combination with plasticulture. So we'll go more in depth on that tomorrow, and it can be used in the garden as well as in the fields.
All right, great. Well, Brad, we'll talk to you next time, and until next time, everyone, we'll see you next week on Specialty Crop Corner.